All right, welcome to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the beat and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. It's Tuesday, so it's Wheel of Time Day. Back to the fires of heaven. We should be mostly finishing up the girl's story. There's some overlap in the climax, as there usually is, because that's the way Jordan constructs things, is these various threads all heading to a singular point, more or less. But we should make it a ways. And I've busted out the Christmas mug because we had a cold front. So
Yeah, we're cooler, but we're just mostly windy. I had to re-secure the newest peach tree because it was kind of going.
all right. So chapter 38 is where we left off. So page 598 in our paperback editions here. Not a ton to say at the beginning here, because I kind of been talking about this in the lead up to it, that Nyneave being Nyneave is going to have some repercussions. Um, specifically with uh the uh the chapter title after it skips to back to Rand, and then when it comes back, the chapter title is The Price of a Ship, and it's a doozy of a price.
Mhm.
Because Nynaeve isn't a complicated thinker. She's savvy, she's a good reader of people, she's smart, but she's not Tom or Moiraine. She's not going to, you know, see seven chess moves ahead. That's not her style of thinking.
Well, I mean, it's not an ability thing. She just never had to.
Yeah. Yeah, when you're dealing with a smaller circle of people who are more simple and direct, then you can be more simple and direct. You don't have all of these variables, you don't have all these things you're trying to juggle socially. But so I don't know what your thoughts are, but I'm skipping to when she actually gets to the prophet.
Oh, that
Um,
that sounds good. Yeah.
so that this chapter 38, there's not a ton that happens here except she kind of gets, and we get caught up with what the heck happened to the poor Shinarans when they got abandoned by Moiraine way
Hmm.
back in 2 books ago.
You get a little tease at some point where they mention the prophet,
Mm-hmm.
and it kind of you almost get a hint that it is going to be the
Yeah.
way it is, but if you didn't if usually on a reread you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense now, but the first time you read it you're kind of like, what, until you get to this chapter and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, that's what they were talking about.
Yeah. And um so it's all from Nynaeve's perspective. So we get her stubbornness. But she is willing to adapt to an extent. Um, and that's when we get to, what page is it where she talks about this? Um, when Masuma starts talking to her, and so this is what I mean by she's not a dummy and she's a good reader of people. Um, she picks up right away that Masuma is a rabid dog
Mm-hmm.
that just listening to him, she's kind of disgusted by the way he's talking to this lady who he doesn't know who it is, but is obviously someone wealthy and important. And she's she's shocked at the way that the rich lady just immediately acquiesces. Like when Masuma says you show too much interest in the in things, and then she just immediately starts pulling off rings and saying here for the cause, basically. But then when Mossima turns on her and she gets a look at his eyes and sees that this is someone who's not right in the head. And she immediately picks up on that. And so in her thinking, she has this thought that men are an oak, women are a willow, which I guess is one more reason we have to cancel Jordan, and he's now problematic.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, we've talked about this because it's a really good analogy, uh, both physically and mentally. And we've talked about the physical part of it with the different way that maidens fight compared to the 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 male Aiel. That they fight differently because they are physically different. And that also applies mentally. We think differently. Men are more direct. People lost their mind over Jordan saying something as simple and obvious as the difference between interactions with the sexes is with men, there's always the inherent, if subconscious, threat of violence.
Mm-hmm.
Ugh.
Well, and not to get us canceled further, especially when women deal with men.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the descriptions we get of Uno and company are, they culturally make them kind of Eastern, but in physique, he makes them very Nordic. They're
Mm-hmm.
big dudes,
Yeah.
big dudes on horseback with heavy, giant armor.
Yeah, he's blending like three different cultures there because you have kind of a Nordic look. Actually, really kind of four. No, so you've got kind of a Nordic look with a heavily Zen Japanese samurai influence in their culture, but then you've also got like high medieval France with the heavy cavalry and the focus on chivalry and honor. So there's kind of a blending of that classical high medieval chivalry idea with the samurai code of honor that he's kind of blended there to make something unique. Um and that shows up here. It shows up with Nyneave in her head being annoyed that so and this is the contradiction, but it's why Nynaeve is such a good character because it makes her feel real that in her head she's annoyed at these, you know, darn men who think with the hair on their chest and think that she needs them to protect them, but yet when she's confronted with a harsh reality, she reflexively bends with that role, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But
But stubbornly does, because I
but
mean, Uno's like, I can't take you in there, and because he said that, she's like, no, you're taking me in there.
exactly. Is this was all that's I should have stopped there first, but I wanted to get to the willow and oak thing, and I'd forgotten that. Yeah, I need to bring that up too because everything that's about to happen happens because she was already in a bad mood because of the stuff that's happening at the menagerie.
Mm-hmm.
She was already in a bad mood, and then not just someone else, but some man told her what was what and was trying to take charge. And she said, no, by golly, I'm going to do this thing that deep down I probably know is a bad idea. And I'm going to figure it out pretty quickly when we actually go into the town and see what kind of state the town is in, and how dangerous and the amount of upheaval and everything that's going on there. But everything that's about to transpire is from her stubbornness rather than um talking, rather than compromising. She stamps her foot and says, "No, we're going in." And then she's gonna do it again here in a little bit. That as much as she keeps repeating to herself, even though she keeps having to grind her teeth to bite her tongue, is, I am a willow. Eventually, she kind of loses her temper, and Uno has to almost literally drag her out. And she's incensed of, because she keeps pushing Masuma of, I need a boat, which again is part of her stubbornness, is she's frustrated, she's losing control, she's out of her comfort zone, she wants to get away from this stupid menagerie because of all the things that are going wrong in it, and she doesn't want to have to deal with. And she's on the verge of pushing Masuma too far when Uno drags her out. And so at 6:19 is where the scene ends, and down near the bottom, how dare you drag me out like that? Another 5 minutes and I would have had him finding a boat today. Another 5 bloody minutes and Massimo would have bloody well laid hands on you. Or rather, he'd have said that someone should, and then someone flaming well would have. And then he starts counting. Is this where he starts counting his curse words? Or is that later?
Earlier when she makes him take him into town, she's
Oh,
like every
yeah.
other sentence. But yeah, he did it every other sentence here.
Maybe if you just cursed every other sentence.
Mhm.
And Jordan fleshes out the prophet more here in these next couple of pages, with Regan and Uno being able to talk more frankly about it. Of, down at the bottom of 6:21, maybe he will, Regan said, and maybe he won't. Sometimes he orders things, and sometimes he forgets or puts it off anyway because something more important comes along. You would be surprised, he added dryly, at what his followers will accept from him without a whimper. So he's, and this is, something that I've kind of nitpicked at before, and this is where it's done really well, is he took a small character that we already know, and now he's using that character to do something bigger, rather than introducing us to someone new. So it's, he's building and he's layering off of stuff he's already established. Um, um, I was brain farted. I had a thought and I've lost it. Oh, yeah, okay. I remember the thought. So it's building up to something here. So chapter 40, the wheel weaves when Galad shows up. So I want to talk about Galad in particular, but something that Jordan does so well, that when people talk about the way he writes characters and the way he builds his characters, is, and it's one of those things that you might not have noticed, but your brain did, is characters can do things that are dumb or foolish or ill-advised or whatever, but it's not a contrivance. So kind of the classical uh, bit of media mockery would be the horror movie girl running up the stairs instead of getting out of the freaking house, right? It's a contrivance. She's running up the stairs because we need to build the drama and the scare. And we need her to keep running away with the monster killer, whatever, pursuing her. It's a contrivance. It doesn't make any sense.
Which also made for one of the better commercials in recent history. Why don't we just run to the already started car? No.
What are you,
What are you
crazy?
crazy? Behind the chainsaws.
Uh-huh. Exactly. So, and that's where when movies like that kind of transcend and become better, like the original Halloween. Okay, Jamie Lee Curtis's character is a babysitter trying to protect a kid, right? So if she does something that seems dumb, it's actually not dumb. It's in her mind, she's trying to keep herself alive, but also has to protect a kid. Something to that effect. Well, Nyneave kind of does some dumb stuff here, but it's totally within keeping of her character. You can absolutely see, and you can more importantly, you can reflexively believe that these are the choices she would make. These are the things that she would say. And it could seem like a contrivance. And she's going to say later when she gets back to the menagerie and is talking to Elayne, and this is a little bit of putting a lampshade on it, is, Jordan kind of calls out himself with Nyneave saying, coincidences do happen. The wheel weaves as it wills. Right? So it could all just be a contrivance to build up to, we want to have this cool scene where they fight through the town as it's going nuts later, as the girl's stories wraps up. But Nyneave is doing what her character dictates. And she's going to keep doing that throughout the series, even when she keeps getting herself in trouble. But she's also not two-dimensional. She does learn. Yeah, she keeps doing dumb things. I'm thinking about a scene in particular way down the line in Winter's Heart where she gets herself in big trouble, and those with her in big trouble as well. But it all made sense to her. But she doesn't do that kind of stuff as much as the story goes on. Now to good old Galad. So where is it here where they start talking?
I'm looking for.
All right. So
that's 627, about middle of the page.
Yeah, 627 is when they start, but all right, so the bottom of 630, though, I think is kind of where this scene really culminates and where Galad really starts to become a character. Because he's obviously conflicted, he's obviously frustrated, he's obviously a little bit emotional for a guy who's not a very emotional guy and doesn't show his emotions, who's always proper, right? But so as he says, perhaps half the reason I wear this, he touched the edge of his snowy cloak, is because the tower sent you out, you and Elayne and Egwene, for the light knows what reasons, when you are what you are. It was like sending a boy who had just learned to hold a sword into battle, and I will never forgive them. But as Elayne said way back when we first met him, is he's being conflicted by two things that he believes are right, because being tower trained is illegal in Amadisia, and he is sworn to oppose the tower as a white cloak. But as he says, the whole reason, or the main reason he took the oaths and put it on in the first place, was because of these young women that he cares about and wants to protect and thinks were done wrong. Which to him just gave him personal reinforcement to the ideology that the White Cloaks were preaching. What they were preaching about the tower suddenly became real to him when he was trying to deal with all of this. But he's clearly conflicted, and this is where I like him as a side character, because all we really know about him at first is this kind of two-dimensional cookie cutter biased view that Elayne has.
Mm-hmm.
All we really know about him is that he's really pretty and he makes all the girls swoon. And Elayne can't stand him because he's, the way Elayne describes him, he's darn near a sociopath. That the way Elayne describes him, he has no empathy, and he will have no problem seeing someone close to him punished if in his mind that person has done wrong.
Mm-hmm. But what she doesn't get is he believes that ultimately it's better for that person in the long run.
Mm-hmm. It it's and and the way Elayne relates it earlier in the series is that's kind of that he's cold, that he feels this he'll he'll turn you in whatever because he feels that's the right thing to do, and then he'll just be disappointed you didn't live up to his expectations. And so from her perspective, the way she relays that is that he does that because he's a very cold individual. That he's in her eyes, he's not much different than Child Buyer, who kind of has that same mentality, but to an extreme, to where he's darn near a psychopath. But
Which is funny.
where
You use sociopath and psychopath, but he's actually almost more autistic.
yes,
He's more
Galad, yeah,
yeah, kind of more Asperger's.
he's more Aspergery, but it's so
Wapner at 8, Wapner at 8.
exactly. So
Yeah.
he's certainly got an element of that, but where Elayne is wrong is he's not doing this because of like cold, rigid calculation of, this is the way it must be, and we all need to follow the rules. And no, it's because he actually cares.
Mm-hmm.
This is his way of uh of expressing how much he cares, for his sister and her friends. Um, and I'm not sure if he did this on purpose, but I have a feeling that maybe he did, because here in a couple of chapters, some stuff is going to happen. That we'll get to next time. But when you first read this scene or on rereads, did it occur to you, holy crap, Matt is a badass?
Oh yeah.
Because, and I have to feel like maybe that was on purpose, because he's about to get back to Matt doing some pretty incredible things, being a big damn hero. And whether you notice it consciously or not, I think there's an element of setup that he's doing to your brain there, because look at how casually Galad disregards these guys. And he's not boasting, there's no bravado here, but he has two hardened warriors who have not only fought other men plenty, but they were bloodied and experienced on the frickin' Blight. And he is incredibly dismissive of them. He has absolutely no fear, and he has no problem with threatening them. Not in a bravado sense, but simply take care of her or else, period.
I think that's an unfair assumption because we get it through Nyneave's eyes. And he may be 100, well, not 100%, but extremely focused on those two while trying to put off an air that he's not.
That's a good point.
Because he's also trained well enough to know the surprise is a huge advantage as well.
These aren't just skull thumpers. He can probably tell that, especially knowing they're Shinarans, that he can probably tell that they know what they're doing, at least to some degree. But it's setting up when we actually see Galad in action later. But then I really do think that he's also setting up what's about to happen with Matt here in a couple of chapters. Because, remember, Matt thumped him and Gawain at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and here is Jordan, at least from Nyneave's perspective, putting Galad on a level above two trained Shinarans at the same time. So what does that say about Matt? Any other thoughts on Galad here and this interaction?
Just to what you're saying about the two, kind of blending what I said and what you said, Galad is an extremely, he is a little bit of a caricature in one way. He's
Mm-hmm.
an extremely analytical mind
Mm-hmm.
where it's X, Y, Z, everything is in line. And the only time it's conflicted, as we see, is when everything doesn't line up the way it should be. And when you talk about Uno and Reagan, it's like those NFL commercials with the analytics. XYZ percentage chance of doing
Mm-hmm.
this. And he's making that calculation as he's talking to Nyneave. He's probably got an extremely high IQ to go to with the good looks and everything, almost to where he's basically made his evaluation of everything, and that's the way it is. Well,
Mm-hmm.
enter the fact of the world that people make decisions based on kind of what would be outwardly appearing randomness, such as the decisions his sister makes and Nyneave makes, and people along the way that don't fit into your calculations very well, because obviously they made a different calculation with different
Right.
information.
Well, that was another thought I had that um so I'm going to try not to get too derailed here, but that was another thought I had about Massima that I forgot about is uh another thing I like about Jordan that I think is necessary in a work so large is that there are numerous antagonists and they have numerous individual goals and motivations. So they're not all cartoonish evil bad guys. So, take Massima here is he does some pretty horrible things, especially when we see him later, when he comes back up again and we see what he and his followers are doing. But it's hard to call him a bad guy because even there in that scene where he's talking to Queen Alliandre of, all right, so be it, henceforth every man who steals will have his hand cut off, and a man who dishonors a woman or kills will be hanged. A woman will be flogged. If anyone can find 12 that agree with him, it will be so. All right. So that's incredibly harsh, but you can't call it evil. I mean, you can definitely call it harsh. But it's still crime and punishment. There still is, you know, rather flimsy, and there's a major problem with the 12 who agree. That means that anyone who's part of a mob can have
Mm-hmm.
mob rule, but at least in his mind, there's a legal proceeding. It's not just being done by fiat. So it's hard to call him a bad guy, even though he is an antagonist and will be for some time to come.
Well, look at what he, with every bit of, and I could think we can say this in this world that we're reading about here, with every bit of his soul attached himself to the dragon as the savior
Yeah.
of the world, who is also supposed to break the world. So that just by default leads to the fact that, to have a mentality that, well, some eggs are going to have to get broken in the process
Yeah.
for the
And
sake
a
of righteousness.
and a dragon that he personally treated like crap before he knew what he was.
Mm-hmm.
So there's another added personal element to it there that's only going to add to his fervor. Um, it It's something that modern Hollywood really doesn't get right. If someone is a bad guy, they're an awful person. There's no nuance. There's no this person is just wrong. So something I thought of when I was thinking about this was, contrast between two different movies. Because I recently rewatched Hunt for Red October because it's one of my favorite movies of all time, and it's infinitely rewatchable in my mind. But it reminded me of, have you ever seen Crimson Tide? Kind of another submarine movie. It's got two of the greatest actors of the last couple of generations, Gene Hackman and Denzel Washington.
Yeah, it's
So
been a long time though. It was like when it first was.
now you're pretty obviously supposed to side with Denzel's character, and that and Gene Hackman's character is wrong. But Denzel Washington's character is also kind of wrong in certain ways, and he does some things that maybe he shouldn't have done. And Gene Hackman is his character is just doing what is right, doing what he's supposed to do. He's not he's not a villain. He's just wrong, or probably wrong in the eyes of the audience. Contrast that with Outbreak. So I saw Outbreak with my dad, and he was really interested in it when the trailers first came out because it was very, very loosely inspired by a book he had read, and he had actually met the woman who wrote it and who was in charge of it. Where somewhere in the DC area, I think it was in Northern Virginia, some I think it was Ebola infected monkeys had gotten loose somehow from a research facility, and this, I believe she was an army uh, officer researcher, and she had been in charge of trying to get them back, and that was one of the things that inspired the movie. Well, it was an interesting movie until you get to the end, and Donald Sutherland's character suddenly turns into a cartoon villain, and it made both of us roll our eyes because up until that point, he and Morgan Freeman were wrong and maybe a little bit shady, but they weren't outright villains. But then all of a sudden at the end, what kind of ruins what otherwise is supposed to be a kind of more realistic movie, Donald Sutherland suddenly turns into a cartoon villain. And it really takes you out of the movie, and it ruins the ending, at least for me. And that's my problem with so much of modern Hollywood, is that every villain is like that. Even if they're not really a villain, even if they're just kind of a jerk, they still end up being treated like a cartoon villain.
Mm-hmm.
So, uh, one that I've heard other people mention is, did you see any of the new Jurassic Park movies?
Oh, I saw Jurassic
The
World.
first one,
That's the one with the
Chris
Chris
Pratt
Pratt. Yeah,
and
I've
the
seen that one.
magical dinosaur. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so when that was coming out, it looked good. I like Chris Pratt, and so I thought, you know what? Uh, the boy is old enough that he can and some of the streaming services, when it was about to come out, they'd put those movies back up. I don't remember which one. And I said, you're old enough for this. Let's watch the first movie. And he really liked it, and to the point where he wanted to get the book. And then we went and saw the movie together. And the scene that made me groan the most, even though there's a lot of schlock in it, and I didn't really think about it till I heard some other people talking about the ramifications of it, is when the assistant woman who's supposed to be watching after the two kids, when she gets killed, it's so over the top. The way she's getting thrown around and eaten by multiple dinosaurs. And if you look at it, it's kind of done like this woman is kind of getting her comeuppance, except she was just kind of an inattentive, annoying jerk.
Mm-hmm.
And this was her punishment. That's kind of messed up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it gives the audience a, I guess, guilt-free way to celebrate the death of someone who they just don't like.
Yes. Compare in the first movie when what's his face? I can't remember the actor's name. The fat guy from Seinfeld. Um,
Yeah.
when he gets killed, there is a comeuppance there because he's the guy who, through his greed, just caused all of this and is going to lead to the deaths of numerous people. So there is a poetic justice there
Well,
that he
and
gets
he
got.
was being nefarious in the act he was doing when he
Mhm.
ended up in the situation that ended up being his death because he was trying to
Right.
get away with the secrets.
Exactly. All right. Rant over. Back to the story. Um, da,
I,
da, da, da.
I will say
Okay.
with Masama though, at some point, someone can be not a bad guy to the extent that he actually becomes a bad guy.
Yes. There's, well, now you're going to get me just briefly. There are some good history channels that I follow that have mentioned this. There is a myth that arose after the Second World War because we had to ally with West Germany of the good Nazi. And so there were some people that maybe got off light or got off completely when they should have been tried for war crimes because the political landscape was changing. And it created this myth of, well, they weren't really a bad one. Well, okay, but they sat around and turned a blind eye to stuff they knew was happening. So at some point, you're culpable for that. Same thing with Massimo, which will escalate later when we get
Mm.
back to him. Is okay, yeah, I know you're a nut, but you have to see what's going on here. That your people are doing. Okay. And then we get back to the other ladies. Um, which is just well written and it's a lot of fun to read. The banter between them and the incredulity from Elayne and Birgitte that back and forth, and then it builds up. Where is it? Where towards the end of this, where Nyneave is snapping at and glaring at Birgitte, and then it says, and then she remembered who she was looking at, and then she felt guilty again because she still has some of that going on.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but it's a bit of comic relief for something that's going to turn pretty serious. That and the chapter ends with um yeah, the last sentence is one of those fool men had to find a riverboat. So one of her motivations here is purely selfish, and it's going to have some pretty disastrous ramifications. All right. And then we're going to skip the next several chapters because it gets back to Rand and Mat and what's going on outside of Karheen, which is a lot of fun, but we want to finish up the girls first. So we're going to jump to chapter 47 and get to those ramifications. So page 753. Let's pause for a second and then let's try and finish this up.
Okay.
All right. So we should be able to get through this chapter is a lot of fun. I like the way Jordan writes action. And that's mostly what this is. When they have to fight their way to the ship. Oh, something I forgot that we didn't bring up is because I meant to, and then I sidetracked myself when I was talking about contrivances. Uh, I keep forgetting every time I reread. until Jordan reminds me. But there is something here that could very easily be seen as a contrivance, and it's when Galad mentions Salidar.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But
Well, I mean,
as
but you get from the also from the title of the chapter that he's slightly being a little tongue in cheek, that she's going to use this thing, but also that is the way of this world.
yeah, the wheel weaves, right.
Mm-hmm.
Um and
Again, he's
and
always got that safety net. So we can talk about contrivance all day long, but there is
but
this fate
he
element.
exactly he has a built-in mechanism to a magical world, one, and two, he really doesn't abuse the system.
Mm-hmm.
So there are things that you could see might be contrivances, but usually you can find some sort of rationale for it. For instance, I always forget that he brings up Salidar the first time they meet, but he says it in passing, and he says it, I think, before we the reader know, so you don't catch the name. And as Nyneave says to Elayne that, you know, he brought it up before, and I just didn't think of it because we were so focused on, oh crap, Galad's a white cloak and he's here, and we got to get out of here. So, but now she's been trying hard for weeks to remember the name, and so when he says it, it hits her like a bolt of lightning. But more than that, he set up the white cloaks knowing about Salidar even before that, because I think it's I don't remember if it's Balwar or if it's the fake uh um spy master guy talking to Niall and mentions a gathering of Aes Sedai somewhere in Gelden or somewhere near the border. So it's one of those things that is this little nugget that you're not going to catch unless also you're even more on the spectrum than Galad is, or on a reread. Is that it's kind of a throwaway that somehow the the gathering of sisters in Salidar has not gone completely unnoticed by at least some of the intelligence agencies of the world. So it's a little bit of a contrivance, but there's also setup to that. It's not just a contrivance.
Mm-hmm.
It's why it works.
Basically, it's the setup for the secret place they thought was secret was not so secret after all.
Which it is going to get brought up and have repercussions later and be used later. All right, so and then we get more. We're probably not allowed to talk about this anymore, but we get the women sniping at each other because they're in a confined space under stress. So, see, a guy would just smack the other guy, but I guess we're not allowed to talk about that. And then they would get over it.
Oh, well, speaking of which, I figured out what was up with Ben. He apparently smacked a kid in the face for annoying him. So he's got detention this Saturday. So,
Well, it's a lesson he needs to learn, is that if you smack everyone who annoys you, you're going to have a sore hand.
yeah.
So can't do that. Um, so 756, we get he kind of ties in the two storylines with Egwene showing up in their dreams, and it makes them suddenly realize, oh hey, that probably wasn't a coincidence. Um, blah 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 blah.
Yeah, this is where skipping ahead kind of gets at you because why she was in the dreams is something we haven't gone over yet.
Yeah, that's why I was like, yeah, okay, shouldn't talk about that anymore. We'll talk about that more with
But
when
I
we
guess
actually get to
I guess
Egwene.
if anybody's actually read up to where we're reading, they would know that anyways.
Okay, and then Tom and Julian show up after seeming to have disappeared over the last multiple chapters of the girl's story. Poor guys. Okay, so 763 is where Nyneave realizes, oh geez, I did that, didn't I? When they inform her that Samara's going nuts and it all seems to have started down by the river. Oops. Um and then we get Uno trying to talk without cursing. And then Nyneave taking charge, so now she's happy. Um
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, I think it's important to note that there's repercussions to this little squabble beyond just this town, because basically because of this, the prophet has declared war on the White Cloaks.
And Nyneave immediately tries to shift the blame. So here's where I was skipping to 767. Galad shows up. Nyneave was in no mood to be affected by a handsome face. Her breath hardly quickened at all. It was you, wasn't it? She demanded before he even reached her. You seized the river snake, didn't you? Why? River serpent, he corrected, eyeing her incredulously. You did ask me to secure you passage. I didn't ask you to start a riot. A riot, Elayne put in, a war, an invasion, all begun over this vessel. Galad answered calmly, I gave Nyneave my word, sister. My first duty is to see you safely on your way to Camelin. And Nyneave, of course, the children would have had to fight this prophet soon or late. Because it either never entered Nynaeve's mind, or she doesn't want to admit to it, that you asked two different people to do the same thing, two different groups of people who are directly opposed to each other. And not just opposed, but hostile to each other.
Well, and I like how he just mistakenly says the right thing, and she's like, ugh. I don't know what he wanted the ship for, but I doubt it was so you could take passage downriver.
Yeah, cue the side eye monkey meme. Uh-oh.
I could make a meme out of that. That would be easy.
Oh, I'm gonna go off on a rant here. Okay, no ranting. I'm just gonna point it out that so at the bottom of 767, Galad's going on and on about wanting the ship and blah 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 blah. And frowning, Galad addressed Tom and Julian. What is the matter with them? Why do they keep staring at one another? Women, Julian said simply, and got slapped on the back of the head by Birgitte for his trouble. He glared at her. Horseflies have a nasty bite, she grinned, and his glare faded into uncertainty as he readjusted his cap. So we kind of talked about this when we talked/argued a little bit about gender. So sorry to break it to you. Gender is based off sexual reproduction. It is a binary. Masculinity and femininity are not. That is where there's a spectrum, because those are personality traits. Those are features, both physical and mental, and ways of acting. Birgitte is a great example of how you write a masculine woman. And I really hope the series gets canceled before we see her, because they're so going to ruin it. Yeah, I can't wait to see Avienda in the second season. That's going to be awesome. I don't even know why she's in the second season. Oh, I think we're pretty certain they're combining books 2 and 3 at this point, aren't we?
Oh, like I said, from that little teaser I saw, there's parts of book 6, I think, that we're already gonna see.
Yeah,
So
there's some stuff in there that's just oy, oy. Anyway, um, Birgitte is still a woman. She still has female traits. She still has female motivations.
she still likes dudes, ugly dudes.
Ugly dudes. Score one for us.
Yeah. So not only feminine men, not even, you could see a woman who loves Galad being also bisexual.
Because he's so pretty.
Or even a girl that likes girls being like, Galad's kind of good looking. But you wouldn't see it saying, oh, Uno's got good qualities, like Birgitte says. It's going
A well
after
put
a
up
guy
man.
yeah, well put up man. You wouldn't see that same crossover. You don't see many women that are like, I like big, rugged, masculine, looks like they get punched in the nose all the time men, and still liking girls. You don't see that often.
Exactly. So she likes to dress sensually. She likes to be looked at. But Nyneave is going to glower or maybe snap at Julian for saying something like that. Birgitte is more masculine, so she smacks him upside the head, which is a much more masculine thing to do. It's how we would generally react, rather than, just being mad, just staring at, saying something. She does something. And there's no way they can do that right. I I like the farewell with Luca here of so the bottom of page 769. Do you think I want the gold, woman? He demanded, rounding on her. If I did, I'd have asked for it the day we crossed the river. Have I asked? Did you ever think why not? The poor man is smitten. And I think Nyneave is kind of just figuring that out, that Elayne was not wrong when they talked about this. If not about the gold, then why do you want to talk to me? Yeah, she doesn't get it. So the bottom of 770 as they go on. Stay? Why should I stay? Why to have my children, of course. Blah blah blah. Luca trying to schmooze, and you want me to marry you? She said incredulously. Marry? He blinked. Well, yeah, sure. Marry, that's what I meant. All right. And then they're on their way to the oh, yeah. Um, so I had this in the back of my mind back when last time when we were talking about this, of Nyneave getting in a fight and Elayne scolding her, and now she's about to kind of do the same thing here. Where she gets all haughty, daughter heir Elayne to try and compel someone to do what she wants, what Elayne wants, rather than what that individual wants and what's best for that individual. I mean, Sorendin is here because when the Sanshin fled Falm, she would not abandon her animals. That's how she ended up where she is. And now you're trying to pull rank on her and impose your will on her and get her to abandon them for your own purposes. And this is someone who to this point has been very friendly with you, very open, that she's learned a lot about the Sanshin in talking with her. And then I love Birgitte's reaction here. So 775 there in the middle.
Sorry for the hiccup there. Yep. Got the full story on my son slapping the other kid, and he deserves it. And looks like we're gonna have to do something here too. He
Well
deserved the
then.
punishment.
Yeah.
Wrong. Yeah.
All right.
Sorry if I ruined your thought.
Where was I? 775. So Birgitte's reaction here. This is why she's such a great character, and I can't wait till we see her again with other people. A great lot of help you were, she growled and stalked off before the other woman could reply. Birgitte caught her up and fell in at her side. From what I hear and what I've seen, you have spent considerable time teaching the woman she has a backbone. Did you expect me to help you take it away from her again? I was not trying to do any such thing, Elayne muttered. I was trying to take care of her. Uh-huh. She is a long way from home, a stranger wherever she goes, and there are some who would not treat her kindly if they learned where she came from. She seems well able to take care of herself, Birgitte said dryly. But then perhaps you taught her that too? Uh, Perhaps she was helpless when you found her? Elayne's stare seemed to slide off her like ice sliding down warm steel. Um, you just stood and watched her. You are supposed to be my she glanced around. It was only a glance, but several of the horse handlers ducked their heads away. My warder, you're supposed to help me defend myself when I cannot channel. Birgitte looked around too, but unfortunately there was no one close enough to make her hold her tongue. I will defend you when you are in danger, but if the danger is only of being turned over someone's knee because you behaved like a spoiled child, I will have to decide whether it's better to let you learn a lesson that might save you the same or worse another time. Yeah. That's why she's great. Very blunt, very direct, but also very wise as someone who has literally lived dozens, if not hundreds of lives.
Mm-hmm.
And um so there is a little amusing comeuppance there because of the way she treated Nyneave, and she does the same things, she just does them differently.
Well, you
And
missed the
that's
best part of that whole
oh,
interchange. It's the when Elayne like goes off and just screams and throws her little fit. She's like, "Oh, was that a cry for help? Are you hungry? I suppose I could find a wet nurse."
I'd forgotten that Birgitte doesn't know who Elayne is at this point.
Yeah.
She still doesn't even know. The daughter heir. Seriously. But I am. Uh I don't know that there's really anything to talk about in the next chapter. So when we get to the end of the fighty death, and we get to see Birgitte being so awesome that she impresses the Shinarans. Um so she's still herself, and she is a bully, but she generally bullies for a good reason when she bullies the captain into taking off in taking any of the refugees who are trying to get the heck out of there with him. Um But then she has to kind of sort of ruin that. So she's got all this compassion and empathy for these, mostly women and children who are trying to flee this chaos and violence. Um, but then she goes and she has to kind of beat up on poor Galad some more. Um, I paid your way as far as Boanda. That's only halfway to Altera. Blah blah blah. I'm afraid you will have to make the own way to Camelin from there. I truly am sorry. You have done quite enough already, Elayne put in, her eyes drifting toward the plumes of smoke rising above Samara. I gave my promise, he said with weary resignation. Plainly, they had had the same exchange before Nyneave came. Um, so it's really just more of Elayne being what we just saw, the scene before they have to fight their way through Samara. Uh, it's kind of the same thing, and you know, it's an extra flaw of her character because this is her half brother.
Mm-hmm.
You would think she would treat him better. And she's doing kind of, the same thing that she just did to Sarindon there of sticking her nose up in the air and you didn't do you didn't do the thing I wanted, or in this case didn't do it the way I wanted. And so now I'm going to look down on you, belittle you, you know, be negative towards you. Um, when yes, for all of the badness that happened, at least you're on your way out of here, downriver to where you need to go, and finally on your way to reuniting, at least to some degree, with the Aes Sedai. Um, I'm not really sure if there's is there anything you want to talk about on the journey down the river?
Uh,
I do like the way that when Nynaeve is arguing with the captain, uh, and the guys add in their bit of intimidation to back
yeah.
her up, then she gets mad that they think she needs her help when you kind of do need their help, and it
Mm-hmm.
works with Tom juggling his daggers and the Shinarans just looking like big angry Shinarans. uh Down the river they go. There's stuff there. You get to what uh we haven't seen this yet, so it pops up here for the first time. The We've seen a lot of the masculinity of Birgitte, and now we get to see more of the femininity. Because so far all we've really kind of seen is she knows she's a good-looking woman and she sometimes likes to flaunt it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but where the femininity really comes in is with the kids. Uh, where she kind of just naturally takes these refugee children and she's entertaining them, and she's a kid person, and that's much more of a feminine trait than a masculine trait. And it
Shall I
just,
shall I talk biology and get us banned?
oh no.
It only makes sense.
Yeah.
Why want to be sexually attractive if you weren't in a childbearing mood?
Hmm.
You may not want a child at the moment from a social standpoint, but the drive behind it is
Yeah.
biologically the same. So it makes sense that the person who likes to be sexually attractive would also like to be motherly.
Makes tons of sense. Um, it helps flesh her out more as a character, because
Well, I take
she's
that back. There's the person who inherently likes to flaunt a little bit for the guys versus the one who narcissistically needs the
mhm.
needs
that
the validation.
that's a good point
Yeah.
because
Okay. So I just it just popped in my head. I need to qualify this
yeah,
because there are the horrible motherly women out there that need the validation.
well, what I was going to point out is that within this setting, we have a stark contrast with the psychotically narcissistic Grendel,
Mm-hmm.
because she, as much, if not, when when we see Birgitte later doing some things, she really likes to show off to the point of being scandalous. You know, that's Grendel. She does the same thing, except Grendel does it from a point of
Power.
power, narcissism, pure evil. Birgitte does it for totally different reasons. Um, and then of course other stuff gets said. But so I'm jumping to chapter 50, 822.
Birgitte does it because it's fun, not because she needs it. It's the same as it's like someone who drinks to have a good time every once in a while, or someone
Well, that's a good point.
who can't stop drinking.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me loosen up and have a laugh here versus, you know, I need my bourbon in
I
my
can't
coffee cup.
function. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so we're nearing the end here, but we do get, as everything comes together, it's nice that Min comes back into the picture and is as reunited with the ladies, because she's been off and on part of their story. Uh, and I like the way Sawan gets pulled into this. Um, and then so the high they were on, and Jordan brings it crashing down hard with this chapter because they're the ones in charge. They're the ones bossing the men around. They're on their own, and then all of a sudden, so page 824 here. Did anyone grant you permission to channel here? Accepted. Sheriam asked, and Nyneave gave a start, hurriedly releasing the true source. Yep, that's how it is now. Um,
Which actually
and
gives them a common ground with Swan and Leone
mhm.
because it's the same but different. Top
It,
dog to
yep.
under the thumb.
And it is what I hadn't really thought about that, but it's what's going to help establish their new dynamic going forward, which is an interesting turn of events that makes for compelling story because that thing that Galad was upset and complaining about earlier about being sent out of the tower, that was at the orders and behest of Swan. And now all of a sudden, they're kind of on the same level. And they're going to have to work together instead of as supreme leader and underling. And they're kind of immediately lumped together. And I hadn't really thought about that before. Swan is there too, because of what's going on and the stuff they're carrying with them. It implicates her in things. And so they're all immediately lumped together. And so now they're immediately going to have to work together. And it's going to help establish a new dynamic with them moving forward. But Jordan also kind of reinforces the Aes Sedai arrogance here, which helps establish how and why these very young people. So I've always found young adult fiction annoying and boring, even when I was a young adult. I did not read a lot of the kind of the the stuff you're supposed to read as, kind of 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, that because so often the protagonists in those stories are young because that's who the audience is, right? And I find it tedious and I find the characters annoying. So I very quickly moved on to, I wasn't reading the young adult fantasy. I very quickly moved on to Lord of the Rings and stuff like that. Well, Jordan here is writing a very adult story, even though he has protagonists that would fit right in to the young adult fiction genre.
Mm-hmm.
But he's establishing here, or he's reinforcing why it is that these younger people are his heroes and heroines. Because the established order is so rigid in its thinking that they're literally endangering the world. So page 825 here, kind of one of the lines that here that jumps up, if the thing does what these children claim, Morvrin said absently, we need to study it. And if Elayne really believes she can make a Tara and Griel, the Brown sister shook her head. So I read this as more than just healthy skepticism. To me, this is disbelief,
Mm-hmm.
which is multiple degrees stronger, because in their minds, it's just not possible.
Well, and that's a normal, healthy thought too, because this is something that hasn't been possible. And to her knowledge, she has more knowledge than almost everybody else
Well,
in
that's
the
why I say
world.
there's a difference between skepticism and belief and disbelief.
Mm-hmm.
It's disbelief to me, and especially the way it's being portrayed here, is more dismissive. Is no, that's not possible. No, that can't happen. Versus, I'm not sure about that. I doubt it. Prove it to me.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not taking that tone with them.
Well, there is a novice's blessing, and that comes with youth. Even the greatest minds we think about, Einstein, Musk. You brought up Aristotle in one of our
Mhm.
conversations. They didn't start when they were old. They were thinking that way when they were young, and they
Yeah,
honed it as life went on.
that's a good point. Yeah, and we see that with all of these characters. I mean, that's why the series is so rereadable. Even as the series was coming out, we kept going back, not just to refresh our memories on the events that has happened before the next book came out. But I don't know about you, but I was going back to remind myself of where these characters started. They are,
And I'm gonna add to what you were saying, because I think this is the difference between your young adult fantasy versus what Jordan did. Is yes, we have young people that are going to ultimately change the world,
mhm,
but we're not watching them be the changers of the world from the beginning. We're watching them develop
mhm.
into those adults. And again, I'm gonna, me and Scott are on a like mind of being annoyed with Egwene, and I'm gonna put this out there as a possible contributor to it. Is Egwene is the most fast tracked of them all, even compared to Rand.
Mhm.
She goes from a little girl to something very, 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 very important in the fastest, least probable way of all of them.
Fastest, least probable, and for reasons we'll get into, with less pushback.
Yeah, well, and realistically, even though she goes through trials and tribulations, her failures are actually minor compared to the others, except for excepting maybe Matt, because he very rarely puts himself out there. He's a
Yeah,
gambler, but he's the gambler that takes the least risks in the whole thing. So,
yeah,
like Perrin going back to the Two Rivers, that was a huge risky move. That was a huge gamble.
He he did it knowing that he was almost certainly going to be executed.
Mm-hmm. Matt tries to keep his gambling to his own detriment, and sometimes
Yes.
that pulls other people into it.
Then we get a little bit of a tidbit of, more importantly, with these. So 827. So with the dream walking Terra and Griel, you can, talk to Egwene, which means you can talk to Moraine, which means you can keep tabs on Rand. So he kind of throws that in there as something important for later. Um, I'm not, I don't really have anything to say about this except to point it out that, so when they're all done, Beonin had said not a word since the shield of Salidar was lowered, but as Nyneave and Elayne made their curtsies, the Grey Sister rose and strode to the table where their things were laid out. And what of this? She demanded in heavy Terraboner accents, whipping aside the white cloth that covered the seal of the Dark One's prison. For a change, her large blue-gray eyes looked more angry than startled. Are there to be no more questions about this? Do you all mean to ignore it? The black and white disc lay there next to the wash leather purse in a dozen or more pieces, fitted back together as neatly as it could be. Well, we have seen this before, haven't we? Because when Moraine found the one in Ruidine, she scraped it with a knife, didn't she?
Mm-hmm.
Or was that the one at the end of the Dragon Reborn? I can't remember.
Either way,
But
we've seen it.
but we, the reader, know that the seals are weakening and that something that is supposed to be literally unbreakable, not even the one power can destroy it, are breaking. But for the Aes Sedai, they to the point earlier when we were talking about their bias and their tunnel vision because of who they are or who they think they are. This should be the least shocking thing out of all the things that they're talking about with the girls, because they're the people who know the most. They're the people who understand way more than the normal population what the prophecies of the dragon really are, what the breaking really was. They're the ones who should be able to see the signs of the times, but because they're so comfortable in their positions, they somehow can't see it. It shouldn't be that shocking with everything that's going on that the seals to the Dark One's prison are weakening. And yet it's so shocking that Beonin is strongly implying here that the girls somehow broke it. Like she wants to shift the blame to these two girls that they have collectively just decided are students still, and once again, and not to be held responsible for what they were told to do by full Aes Sedai, including the Emerald Seat herself.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, she's so stubbornly status quo that to me she seems to be implying that they somehow did this. They somehow did something wrong to cause this, when she, of all people, should know that's impossible. Um, uh, I don't know that I want to go too much more into what happens with the rest of this chapter, because a lot of the stuff that so Min popping back up and being glad to see Nyneave and Elayne, but then there's more that's going to happen there later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that might be better as a wrap up because something important happens with Nyneave in after we go through the Rand stuff
Yep, I'm just
and
looking
get to
in a.
the everything comes together stuff.
So, um, yeah, and the Sawan and Leanne stuff is going to have more impact later when when we find out more stuff about what's going on. Um, so the chapter ends with a break and a shift to Elaine's perspective as um she goes to talk privately with Min, who I mean, do you want to talk about this now, or do you want to wait until it kind of culminates a little further down about the I don't even know if I would call it polyamory. It's the love quadrangle. Not even a triangle here. Um, but Elayne has figured it out. And she wants to talk. She wants to talk frankly with Min about it. Which makes sense because it's been months since she saw Rand, and
Mm-hmm.
she only knows what's going on and can only pass messages on through Egwene.
Mm-hmm.
So she has to be going a little bit nuts about, what's going on with not just with him, but with us. So page 844 down at the bottom. Man, you had a viewing about Rand and me, didn't you? She went 2 steps before she realized the other woman had stopped. Yes, it was a wary word. You saw that we were going to fall in love. Not exactly. I saw you'd fall in love with him. I don't know what he feels for you, only that he's tied to you in some way. Elaine's mouth tightened. That was about what she had expected, but not what she wanted to hear. Wish and want trip the feet, but is makes the path smoother. That was what Linny said. You had to deal with what was, not what you wished was. And you saw there would be someone else, someone I'd have to share with him. Two, Min said hoarsely, two others, and I'm one. Mouth already open for the next question. For a moment, Elayne couldn't only say her. You? She got out at last. Min bristled. Yes, me? Do you think I can't fall in love? I didn't want to, but I did, and that's that. Poor Min. Uh, um,
I do like who's the other one? I don't know. Only that she has a temper. Not Nyneave. Thank the light.
yes, yes. Uh, it
Don't think I could have survived that.
it
If
is
only
it
she knew.
the last couple of pages here are very awkward. Which I think is a hallmark of great writing that uh you ever watch something on a TV show or movie where it's so awkward and embarrassing that you kind of cringe because you have so much empathy for what's going on. I think it's a hallmark of his writing ability that you kind of get that with this scene of this is awkward. You know, Elayne needs to talk about this, but she kind of doesn't want to, and she doesn't know how to. And Min is awkward because she comes from a very different place than Elayne. Uh, and there's got to be some tension there of this is someone who was raised in a rough mining town on the edges of civilization by ants because she was orphaned at a young age. And she's having to interact with her monarch, the daughter heir of the country she's ostensibly from. But Min reflexively does not like authority figures.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some awkwardness there. Plus the fact that she knows, not only does she know, but she has known from the beginning what's going on there. And she's been having to struggle with herself of how do I come to terms with this and what do I do about it?
Mm-hmm. I do
But
like as the conversation goes on, they're speculating on who the third one is, and she's like, "Well," Elaine's like, "Never you mind about that. We have another sister, you and I, one you've never met. She's gonna keep an eye on him."
Avienda had better be keeping a close eye on him.
Well,
Oh, is she?
unfortunately, accidentally, he got an accidental eye on her, and then
Yep. And then
you know,
shenanigans.
running naked in the snow makes good for sexy time.
Yeah. And yeah, you're right. That's where we'll end it because when we get back to the girls, it's in the middle of the climax. Giggity. Um, as stuff happens, so we'll cross back over there when we finish up, which theoretically should be in two more
I think,
sessions.
well, I think we could do it all in one.
Yeah, it depends on how long that first chunk of the battle around Karheen. The only reason I think it might take a little longer is because we have both Matt and Rand, but I do kind of feel like that first part is more Matt than Rand, so we may just talk about him for the most part and see how
Well,
quick that goes.
and you know, this doesn't spoil it, but this is one reason I love Matt in these books, and it's related to something we've talked about before. I think it was the last Wheel of Time one. Is Matt does badass things slightly under the radar, and even when they're not under the radar, there's never a woohoo moment.
Hmm.
As flamboyant as he is at times, he never goes woo in the heat of battle. And
Exactly. Yeah. That's that's what makes his awesomeness work. That's why it's not just kind of a shallow popcorn moment movie kind of thing. That's
he ends it with more of an Urkel moment. Did I do that?
well, I don't have any spoiler things to talk about. The only kind of spoilery-ish thing I mentioned is just keep an eye on the ramifications that Nyneave just caused by having two hostile forces try and do the same thing for her
Yeah. Well, let me
because
bring up the
she
comments
wanted to get
then.
out of there. But yeah, we will talk about comments. So jazz hands, spoiler section
Well, and
if you're reading
it
for the
might
first
make us
time.
think it might make us think of some
Yeah.
spoilers too. Oops.
I will say that um something I had thought of is uh and I'm talking to you, Scott, because I know you don't like Egwene, but and I kind of thought of this in this context when I was thinking about Nynaeve, is that there are some really all the terrible things that are going to happen in this region, you could blame on Nynaeve. But as Galad says, the the prophet and the white cloaks had to come to blows sooner or later. So the assassination of Franz Ferdinand didn't start World War One. The stock market crash didn't cause the Great Depression, etc., and so forth. Those were just the triggering events. The dominoes had all been laid well before that. It just so happened that this person, this event, flicked that first domino to set everything to falling. And that's what Nynaeve just did. Is yeah, you can trace everything back to her, but it would be a fallacy to stop at her because there was all this stuff happening before she got there. And that's why the plot for Wheel of Time is so good, and that's why it's so rereadable, is because you do have all of these threads. It's not a linear point to point to point. It's also one of the things that makes it frustrating sometimes, but that's what makes it so rich, is that you get that there are other things going on outside of the scope of this story, and you get the impression there's even more than that going on.
Mm-hmm. As far as comments, I don't know what he's referring to. I'd have to check that part of the video. Morally bankrupt people cannot create realistic characters. I forgot what we were talking about
What
at
we were
that
talking.
moment.
Yeah, we went off on some tangents there about why modern writing sucks.
Now, are these in order of first to last or last to first on these as I read them? Because I'm starting at the top, but it sounds like it might be something from the end of our conversation.
I'd forgotten about that, and that is something that I think I had seen on boards before, is that Elayne is the reincarnation of Ilyana.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he's also mentioned that in previous comments as well.
I don't know if Jordan ever addressed that. So that may be something I dig into later when I have a minute.
Let's see if it's in theory land. Remember how to spell Ileana?
Uh, I think it's Illyena.
That's what I had.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I don't always like when something is a tool, but to that point, to your point, and what I think Scott is saying here is it wasn't just a tool uh of as he says, Jordan needed this to create suspicion about Cindine Dane later when she pops up in Rand's arc. Um, but you brought up when we were talking about this that it would make sense that Lanfear is so arrogant she wasn't bothering to hide, that she didn't necessarily let herself be seen, but she didn't care.
Yeah, that's what I got from that. He kind of agreed with what I said, that she wasn't specifically trying to hide, but she wasn't trying to be seen either.
Mhm.
Not coming across anything in theory land about Elayne.
And yeah, so Nyneave comes from a very morally based culture. Good women don't have casual sex. The cultural mores of the Tours people is that sex is reserved for marriage, or at least marriage promised relationships. And yeah, but the point I was trying to make is that it's more than just that. That is where she comes from, and that is a major influence, which will cause some hilarity later in Winter's Heart when fun stuff happens. Giggity. But so she has that as a framework, but then specifically for her as an individual, she is someone who has been so hyper focused on um what she is and what she is being part of who she is, that you get the distinct impression that she has never let herself have a crush before. That she had decided this is what she was going to do. She was going to become a wise woman. She had a gift for it. She had a passion for it, and wise women seldom marry. And she certainly did not seem inclined to break that tradition. And then Land came along and kind of turned her on her head.
Mm-hmm.
So the frustration with the stupid series is that it, it's more than just she's breaking her cultural mores by hooking up with Land so quickly. It undermines her as a character. It undermines who she is. It cheapens that relationship and the build up to it on both of their accounts, because they kind of give lip service to Lan and the I don't remember exactly which book he says this in, is that, you know, any woman he loved, he would, something to the effect of, he would make a his bridal gift would be a funeral shroud.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, okay, well, that's one of the reasons he holds himself apart, even though he obviously is attracted to this woman as well on a very deep level. So it cheapens it for both of them that they hop in the sack so quick. And not just for, well, this doesn't make sense culturally, because it doesn't. So it weakens the world building as well. But you lose the setup, you lose the learning about these characters and
Mhm.
who they are. And it's what makes their relationship so impactful in the second half of the series.
Yeah, this is actually common in realistically all culture and humanity. Is we have to separate ideal from nature, right?
Mhm.
Where she is in a culture that the ideal is you marry before you do any of that kind of thing, at least out in the open. Well, you
Mhm.
don't do it out in the open, but to where people know you're doing it, like you have kids and stuff. Uh, and she was in a profession where, well, usually I don't marry, and she never was tempted. Nature never came in the door,
Yeah, that's a good point.
and then land comes along, and it's someone impressive enough to even get her juices flowing. And now nature's in the door where she kind of wants to have a romantic relationship for the first time in her life. And all these other things that prevented her mind from going there are gone now.
Mhm.
But because of the flow of how the world worked, because of Land's personality, and because of her own stubbornness,
Yeah.
it worked out in the ideal as ideal as it could be, with the world falling apart and people dying, and you know things along those lines.
Right. It She's the type of person who's not going to let herself be pulled in and give in to these emotions, these feelings.
Now look at the two rivers as a society now. They very Not only is it the ideal and culturally they're expected to behave a certain way, but they're very seldomly tempted to do otherwise. The Once the girl braids her hair, things can start moving along, and she braids her hair
Mm-hmm.
at quite a young age.
Mm-hmm.
So it's because of the way society is set up for them, it actually plays to their advantage doing it that way as well. And of course, they even bring up indirectly times when that didn't happen. When Perrin would talk about a certain guy who gets caught rolling in the hay, or a girl with a reputation or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's the rare occasion where everybody knows about it because it's so outside of the norm. But again, it's they get married and do this kind of thing so young. Plus, your selection is very low.
And
It's not
as
like
kind of,
Tinder where you could swipe, 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 swipe. Fine. Oh, swipe this way. Like it's not like you have 100,000 people around you or a million people around you if you're in a metro area that you can choose from. Rand was basically betrothed to Egwene from the beginning
yeah.
because there were very few men at his age and few women at her age. And then I'm pretty sure Matt would have rejected it, but his parents probably had someone picked out for him too.
And you also had a family bond there, is what,
And Perrin was happily married till he killed his wife in the forge.
All right, well,
I had to do it at least once.
that's a fun way to end it. I was about to say I've got a heart out, so it's time to end it, and that's such a great place to end it. God, geez. It really is a great place to end it though, because it illustrates why, you know, I got off on this rant because I was talking about why the series sucked, because it did not set up and pay off. You have rushed Nynaeve and Lan, so you don't have that build, which means where's the payoff? You've already had it pay off. Well, same thing with Perrin. You had something so horribly traumatic and huge happen in his life within 5 minutes of meeting the character. Nothing else matters. Because you wanted that contrived setup, that contrived emotion, that contrived storyline. Well, now you have weakened and cheapened anything else you do afterwards.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it cheapens something else. So when Perrin loses himself in battle,
Mm-hmm.
it's because of the wolf nature, right? Which he developed when he started becoming a wolf brother, which is why he was so scared of it. because this thing coincided with this other thing that started happening.
Yep.
What they did in the show, by their own admission, was to show the berserker nature of his unconscious self, basically. Well, that was long before he was a wolf brother. That's long before you even introduce the wolf timeline. You made that his nature while he was 100% human.
Yeah.
Not something that developed because he was this this hub for something old.
And the wolf brother thing is a major component to Perrin's character, literally to the very end of the series.
If he had that nature before leaving the forge, he never would have taken the axe on the journey. The axe became a problem after Wolf Brother.
That's a good point. There's, that's something that's going to come up here when he comes back into the series, is hammer or axe, hammer or axe.
Mm-hmm.
And it was teased at one point early on, but now it's going to become a major component. Well, how is there a major component? Why would he ever choose the axe if he literally killed his freaking wife? He's going to choose the hammer.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't make sense otherwise. Good
why
job.
Why would you
modern
take
writers
the
who
axe
suck.
you killed your wife with?
Yes. So stupid. So stupid. All right. Well, I gotta go. We will see y'all next time. For more Wheel of Time. Thursday we'll talk about something. I don't know what. Probably something stupid because everything sucks.
I think we can keep with the us versus thems a little bit, especially
Yeah.
with that canvasser that got the ever living tar beat out of him in Florida. Because thems.
Thems.
So we could kind of go along that line. There's so much we could talk about at the moment.
Yeah, unfortunately so. All right, well, we'll see y'all then.
Later.